machine still won't have arrived.
All right, welcome to the inaugural episode of 40 Years of Film. This is where I go through and year by year I pick out my favorite movie from every year that I have been alive. As I said in the introductory video, we're going to try to keep these kind of 5 years per episode. And this is one of the few years we have to kind of break that rule, because before we move on to the 80s, we got to make a very brief stopover in the 70s. We have to stop at what many have called the year of destiny. This was the year where the pinnacle of human society was reached. On this day, in the last year of the 70s, he arrived. I believe it was written in scripture or foretold by Nostradamus, one of the two, and it said, "Yea, he doth walk with the director's stick in one hand and travel with a load of furry animals by his side. He will nitpick, and obscure pop culture references will be his venom. For this was the year of my birth, and it is where our journey begins." So join me as we begin 40 years of film, 1979. The Muppet Movie. Really, what else could it be? I am hard pressed as I was going through and coming up with this list. There's some great films on this list, but I don't think there is a film that has informed the person that I am more than the Muppet Movie. I can't think of a movie that has been more influential to me in the development of my artistic outlook, my development as a person. This movie has my favorite song of all time, The Rainbow Connection. It has one of my go-to quotes that I use to this day on opening night speeches. Anybody who's been in one of my shows, especially over the last couple of years, you've heard this quote, so you know it. The level that this film has affected me, I don't think there's a chart for it. This is truly just one of the most remarkable and amazing motion pictures to ever come down the chute. And everything from that first iconic shot of Kermit playing his banjo in the swamp, the magic of seeing Kermit ride a bike or Fozzie drive a car, and just seeing the Muppets out in the real world, but moreover, it's the story it tells. This journey to be bigger, and I think one of the things that's overlooked about this movie a lot is what is the inciting incident that gets Kermit on the road. You see a lot of these films about being a star and going to Hollywood. It's always about being a star. We're gonna make you a star, kid. You're too good to be here in the sticks, kid. But that's not what Kermit's motivation was for leaving. What got him to leave? It was the line, "You could make millions of people happy." And that's what spurred him on. That's what his goal was, and that's what he was aiming for. And when I get too tied down in the ego stroking of the theatrical business, I try to remember back that, why are you doing it? Are you doing it to please judges? Are you doing it to win awards? Or are you doing it to make people happy? And that's just one of the millions of ways this movie has affected me in my life. And it is fitting that this is the first film on this list. And as I've said, I can't think of a film that is more influential than this one. 1980. Airplane. I don't think many people would disagree that Airplane is by far the greatest film parody that has ever existed. But I truly think I'm going to go one better. I think Airplane may be the best comedy ever. This film is so fucking funny. It's a movie that I've seen so many times. I know the jokes. You know, people who love this movie, they can recite the jokes. We all know them by heart. And yet every time I watch this movie, even knowing everything that's going to happen, I still laugh my ass off hysterically. This film really, everything about it is perfect. It has the perfect balance between parody and respect. So it's not just making fun of the film or the film genre that it's spoofing, but it respects it enough. It's treating it, with some reverence. It has every kind of comedy: verbal comedy, sight gags, a little gross out humor. It's got everything. So if you don't like one joke, you don't have to waste a lot of time before the next one rolls along. It also is fairly revolutionary in some of the things it did. For instance, it might be hard for us to think of it now, but at the time, some of the actors in this film who would go on to become comedy legends, Leslie Nielsen, Lloyd Bridges, also Robert Stack, though he wasn't really a comedy legend, but these were people that nobody thought of as comedians at the time. These were serious actors. And that just works towards the brilliance of this film, to have these respected actors delivering these lines straight-faced and with the same amount of gravitas they would give if they were, doing a Shakespearean piece. It just makes the entire thing funny. Again, I can quote this movie. I'm sure most people, once they saw it, thought of, if nothing else, Don't Call Me Shirley. But I really do believe this is the greatest comedy of all time. And if you've never seen it, then I think you owe it to yourself to go check this film out, because it is unique, it is trend-setting, it's one of a kind, and it's just one of the best. 1981. Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm hard-pressed to think of another action hero outside of James Bond who has been as influential and as recognizable as Indiana Jones. And what sets that bar higher for me is that I think it's when you go to discuss these films or you go to critique these films, I think you discuss Indiana Jones movies in their own category. You don't necessarily compare them to other action films. You compare them to other Indiana Jones films, to the tone, to the pacing, to the story elements. That's what you're really going with here. And this was the film that set the pace. Everything about this film just makes it one of the most enjoyable action movies out there. And everything about it kind of just plays to my sweet spots. First of all, it's heavily influenced by cliffhanger movie serials, much like its predecessor Star Wars was, but this time even more so. I think this is where Harrison Ford really cemented himself as a certified leading man and an A-lister. He has the perfect blend. He perfects what he did in Star Wars, and that is the lovable rogue. I mean, when you really look at Indiana Jones in this movie, he's not a nice guy. He's not a likable character, but Harrison Ford has enough charm and enough charisma that you still root for him. He's still the hero of the picture. Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood, one of the best female co-stars in an action movie ever, in my opinion. Unlike kind of some of the Bond girls, she starts out as his equal. I think some of the best villains, and some of the best action sequences. All the action sequences in this film are a lot of fun. It's not just that they're high octane, they're, heart-stopping. They're fun to watch, and you remember them. I can tell you how much I really love this movie. I am deathly afraid of snakes. People think that's so funny, but seriously, snakes scare the shit out of me. And as we all know, there is the scene in the pit with all the snakes. I can actually get through that most of the time. But here in this introductory film, we are introduced to a new kind of action film, and a film that would kind of become not so much a benchmark, but a blueprint of kind of what the 80s action was kind of gonna look like. I don't think I need to scream this film's praises anymore. I think it does that on its own. 1982. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. This is one of those instances where my favorite film of the year is not my favorite film in its own genre, but I've already done an extensive breakdown of Star Trek II in the series review. So let's just hit the high points here. This was the blueprint for how to make a Star Trek movie. They had done Star Trek the Motion Picture, but even now that is not looked on very fondly. But this was the one. Nicholas Myers, especially as the director, was the guy who came in and said, this is what a Star Trek movie should look like, this is what a Star Trek movie should feel like, this is how it should be filmed. And I just think it set the bar for the Star Trek franchise going forward. Every film that bears the name Star Trek has had this one looming over it, and it is not undeserved. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. I've already done an extensive review. You want more detail, go watch that. But yeah, there's a reason why Wrath of Khan is as revered as it is. 1983. Return of the Jedi. I had already mentioned this movie in the introductory video. I was trying to explain the difference between the best film of a year versus my favorite film of the year. And I used the example that, many people would say Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie, and I think they'd be right. But my favorite Star Wars movie is definitely Return of the Jedi, and I think there are some extenuating circumstances and reasoning for that affection for it on my end. First of all, this is the very first movie I remember seeing in the theater. I remember we saw this movie dozens of times at a little theater in Georgia where we were living at the time. And this was really, as far as I can remember, I think this was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw. I think I saw the other two after this one. And moreover, even now, I do think that this is a very underrated entry in the series. I love how the whole first act in Jabba's palace gives us a look at the Star Wars universe outside of the conflict with the Empire. So I really enjoyed that. I love the creation of the second Death Star. I love the different environments that we're in. We're back in the desert on Tatooine. We're in the greenery of Endor. We're in the gray of the Emperor's throne room. I love the final reveal of the Emperor. I've done an entire editorial on why I still think Ewoks are awesome. So, again, I won't bore everybody with that. But I'll just hit the high point and say Ewoks are awesome. And overall, I think this is one of the most satisfying conclusions to a trilogy out there. I think it ended the way it needed to end. The idea of Vader being turned back from the dark side. It's just an all-around great, entertaining, fun movie, and it sits very high in the happy places in my memory, and I still dig it to this day, and I will defend it against any fanboy haters out there. 1984. Gremlins. So this was a hard one. This was a hard year to distinguish because it was between this one and The Karate Kid. And I've done a review, a retro review on The Karate Kid and why that movie was so important to me. But when it came down to it, I had to go with Gremlins. Again, I have fond and somewhat embarrassing memories of seeing this in the theater. But Gremlins is such a bizarre animal, which is a funny way of describing it when you consider what it's about. It is I don't even know how you would describe it. What genre does Gremlins belong into? Is it a horror movie? Is it a family film? Is it a kids film? Is it a comedy? What is it? And it's this homunculus of all of those different genres rolled into one. It's a picture postcard of a perfect time in filmmaking, when high concept things were given room to breathe. These days, you always have the feeling if you take something really weird to a studio, they're just going to go, what? But something like Gremlins, little fuzzy monsters that become big. Oh my God, what? It's an atmosphere that completely sucks you in. It's a Richard Donner, I believe, directed it, and it is a fucking brilliant piece of direction. I love how the town of Kingston Falls looks like, a perfect Christmas card, like something out of Norman Rockwell, and then just like the ugliness of it starts to come out. The Gizmo and the Gremlins themselves are masterpieces of puppetry and practical effects. It's a movie that I remember loving as a kid and loving now, but even then and now, especially now as rewatching it recently, and I watch it and go, holy fuck, this entire third act of, Billy chasing Stripe around, in the department store, shit, that's fucking dark as hell. He's throwing saw blades at him and coming at him with a fucking chainsaw. When you're a kid, you remember Gizmo in the little pink Barbie car. That's what your memory goes to. That's what the merchandising all had. But you go back and watch it, you're like, holy shit, this is some dark stuff, and they let me watch this? Which again, it just speaks to the brilliance of the story and the characters. Gizmo was a character, and yes, he was a character that you automatically connected with. It wasn't just that he was little and cute, but there was a personality in there, and you can also say that with Stripe. There was a personality in that puppet, and that goes again to how I'm always saying I much prefer practical effects to CGI effects. It's not that you can't get personality from CGI, but I think it takes a lot of talent to get that from a hand puppet, and they really did. I'll tell you the embarrassing part. I remember I cried at the end of this movie, and cried hysterically because, of course, the old man comes and takes Gizmo away, and I was afraid someone was going to come and take our dog away. And I lived in fear of that. So I cried a lot in this movie as a kid, and my mother will never let me forget that. So yeah. 1985. The Goonies. This is it for this, a lot of the films on this list, especially these earlier, I don't think I need to stand up for, and I need to sell anyone on the idea that these are classic films. You don't need me to tell you that The Goonies is a kick-ass movie. And I think you don't have to ask anybody of my age range why Goonies is a kick-ass movie, because we all know this was the blueprint for so many of us growing up. This was the blueprint for a kid-themed adventure film. And I think that's the key word, adventure. When you're young, at least, I can only speak from my experience. So coming from a young male perspective at that age, you always want to go out and have an adventure. You know, that's the key word in your youth, adventure. You don't really know what an adventure means, but you just know you want to have one. And I think where a lot of that comes from is something like the Goonies. This is what you want an adventure with your friends to look like. You know, you want something scary, but not, you know, incredibly scary. You want something dangerous, but not so dangerous you don't think you're never going to survive. You want a giant fucking water slide. God, who doesn't watch that moment when they're all sliding down before they hit the ship and they're all going down these water slides going, man, I want to fucking do that. And I think what really sells it is not just that they got really good actors in there to play the members of the Goonies. I'm sorry for the reflection I'm getting right now. But I think it's that those characters were so indicative of the types of kids that the film was aimed towards. You could sit there and watch that movie and pick out your friends in that film. They were the kids that you hung out with. They were the kids that you knew. And therefore it was so much easier to put yourself into, you know, their shoes and go on the adventure with them. I also got to give a special shout out. I think all of them did great in this. You know, Sean Astin, of course, this is one of his big films. You know, Josh Brolin, the future Thanos, this was great in him. But you know who deserves a great round of applause? I think I never remember the actor's name, but Chunk. Chunk he carried the comedy of it, and he did it so well. But Chunk also had the real tenderness, the real emotional thrust of it with him and him and Sloth. I mean, it's a really, I always get a little, I won't say weepy, but I always feel that little tang in my dark, evil heart at the end when he says, you're going to come live with me now, and I'm going to take care of you because I love you. It's a beautiful moment, and I think Chunk really is the heart of that movie, and I don't think he gets enough praise for just how much of the comedy and the emotional weight he had to hold up. But yeah, Goonies is the quintessential kids adventure film. So yeah, all right, well that does it for the first episode of 40 Years of Film. Hope you're enjoying it. What are your favorites from the years that I've listed? What are your favorites from all the years you've been alive? I'd be very interested to know. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to bringing you the next 5 years. So until next time, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.